liquids all over the walls. It looked like maybe ketchup or other sauces. They couldn't really tell what it was, but it was sprayed all over the house. There was shampoo on the walls and soap on the walls. And so when Susan and Matt and the girls go inside, they think that someone's invaded their house. So they run back out again. They're kind of looking around the property, wondering what they should do. And no one's come near their property, and they would have seen someone come to their property. So they start filming it. They go in and they film what's going on. That's why we have all these pictures. And they have no idea what to make of this. Matt believes it's Jamie, so not his biological daughter. Susan believes it's his daughter, Marie, and it starts this awful conflict between Matt and Susan. This would be the start of what would turn out to be a major fracture in this family, because it just continued to grow. You got to put yourself in their position. If you're Matt,
Oh. Who? Why so can only hear one screen instead of my other? I think it's possible. It's definitely possible. I just don't know how to do it. Sure, I don't really care.
you had an intruder in your home. If it's not an intruder, then what caused it? They believe that the other child is doing this. They believed it so much that they did not see reason, but more than that, it would keep Matt and Susan from handling this the way I think
Oh my gosh, my parents are so
get the police involved. They don't. So they start cleaning it up, and the house was really a mess. So it took quite a while to clean it up. And they ultimately just kind of moved on in that way that people who are in denial move on because you're in denial. That's what they were doing. So a week passes since finding their house in disarray with cans and jars all over the place and liquids on the walls. And Jamie and Marie are spending some time together in Jamie's room. Marie was sitting at a desk that was next to the bed, and Jamie had a cup of coffee. She puts the cup of coffee down on the desk next to Marie and says, I have to go use the bathroom. She turns around, she walks out, she comes back, and Marie has her head down in her homework. She's not apparently paying attention to anything around her. And Jamie walks in and sees that the cup of coffee that had been sitting on the desk has now been thrown all over her bed. And there's only been one person inside of the room, and that's been Marie.
Fuck.
She's like, Marie, what are you
In
doing?
hell.
Why'd you throw my coffee all over the bed?
Okay.
And Marie pokes her head up, and she's like, what are you talking about? And she looks over at the coffee, and she's just as surprised as Jamie is. She's like, I didn't do that. Jamie doesn't believe Marie. She's mad at her because Jamie believed that Marie was the one responsible for placing
Or no, I don't wanna
hands
do that.
and everything all over the house. And so this was just another example of her trying to get attention or something like
Okay.
that. Jamie leaves the room to get some bleach. She comes back and she puts the bleach down on her dresser. She had all her drawers open with her clothes out. And she has this bottle of bleach sitting right at the top of this dresser. And so she goes over to the bed, picks up the cup itself that has the coffee, she puts it down on the table, turns around to get the bleach, and the cap has been turned off and it's now dumping bleach. She knows it could not have been Marie. So she screams, Marie looks over, she sees what's going on, she screams. Susan hears this and comes charging in the room and she's like, what's going on? The girls can't describe what's going on. And as they're standing there, a picture frame falls off the wall. And it startles them all. They're looking over, and then another picture falls. It's one thing to have one picture fall, but to have two fall in close succession to one another, that's not a coincidence. Susan sees the pictures fall. She hears her kids in hysterics, and they run out of there. They get in the car and
I wonder if I'm so surprised.
this was a good moment.
I'm not even trying.
Jamie, without saying anything, believed Marie was responsible for placing everything around the house and making a mess in the house. Marie felt the same way about Jamie. Again, they didn't say it to each other, but it's how they rationalized it. Susan was doing the same thing, but before both of them. Before Jamie had placed everything in the house. Now, Susan had started to believe that something else is going on in the house, and Marie and Jamie absolutely believe something's going on in the house. They actually suggested that we believe our house is haunted. At some point after driving around, Susan and Jamie and Marie go back to the house. Matt has been at work the whole time, so he's not there. When they get back to the house is once again covered with hands all over, placed in weird orientations, around things in the microwave, the fridge is open all now there's literally all over the wall, and they hadn't been there. Neither had Matt. Now combine it with the fact that you just had this coffee and bleach incident, the picture's falling off the wall, they're talking about the house being haunted. You can imagine what it was like to walk into that house and see it like that all over again. And it could not have been Jamie or Marie or Susan. When Matt came home that night, he was just more convinced that it had to have been Marie or Jamie or even Susan. Because Susan's acting like something's going on here, something paranormal going on.
I do a hand cam so my camera's working.
And now he seems to be buying into this idea that it's some paranormal thing. He was a really intense skeptic and was just absolutely unwilling to see this as anything other than a bad prank. Now, his girlfriend is even against it. It causes a huge fight. He's like, why are you feeding into this? She's saying, you don't get it. There's something wrong with this house. Practically at each other's throats, they pick the house up again. It takes forever. They put everything back, and by the end of it, it's like no one wants to talk to each other. The kids are fighting with each other. Susan and Matt practically hate each other, and that's how that night wrapped up. That night, all the power went out in the house, and all they heard all night was doors banging non-stop. And their stove is set to light, so all you hear is that clicking sound. They couldn't get it to turn on. All this paranormal activity, and they're recording it. They have no idea. Even though we view this story and say, come on guys, either this is an elaborate hoax or you gotta go to the police. You gotta do something right here. You're doing it wrong. You're in denial, you're fighting with each other. You can't do that. You gotta do something about this. But now put yourself in their position. Their world has been completely turned upside down. Everything they believed and understood about the world is being questioned right now. They are trying to hold on to every last shred of that former life and understanding of life that they had before this.
Oh shit.
They just continue to fight, to be at each other's throats, blaming each other for all the things that are blatantly happening that have nothing to do with Matt, Susan, Jamie, or Marie. So at this point, Susan and Matt and the girls have not told any of their friends or other family members about what's going on. So the next day, Susan would actually go to her close friend and say, here's what's going on.
No!
And her friend would say,
I know the pump's better, but I don't really care. I'm trying to get better at the game.
Feels like you're intruding, and if you offer some sort of peace offering to demonstrate that you mean no harm, that you want to coexist, that you'll get along with
I want to do arena later.
Maybe it'll stop. So whether this was good advice or not, we don't know. But Susan finally has something that she has control over, and she really gets into this. She gets the girls, she knows Matt's going to be out today at work, and she knows Matt would not be cool with doing this. He would not believe that offering a peace offering would just cause him a fight. His father's been there time,
What?
I
don't want to play arena right now.
Figurine.
I'm not bad.
Susan
You're bad.
loved
Shut the
cats,
fuck!
And she figured that a cat represented something she loved, and so it would be the perfect kind of deliberate, intentional offering, showing that
Intentional
she means no harm,
offering.
They mean no harm. Let's kind of call
No
it
harm.
truce here.
Please give
And
me
she
likes.
puts
I like likes.
candles on this table, and she puts the cat right in the middle, and she doesn't know what to say or how to do it, and the girls are just sitting there like, what's happening here? And Susan just
Let's do arena.
says, please accept
Wait,
this gift.
sorry for
It's my
blacks
gift
out.
to you. We mean no harm, and we want to coexist. And it just so happens that as they're performing this
Oh
kind
my
of
God.
ritual, Matt came home. He had not slept the night before. It had been a really bad night with the slamming of doors and all that craziness. And so he left work early. He called in sick, basically. And he comes into the house and literally sees Susan doing this kind of ritual with his daughter and his stepdaughter. And he immediately goes to like, absolutely not. We're not going to go to trying to interact with this thing. We're not going to act like it's real. It's not real. And so he goes over and he kind of picks up on
Wait,
what they're
let me
doing.
do another
that
skin
this
one.
cat
I
figure
like
is
this
the
skin.
center of attention.
If there's
And
just
Susan and the girls are telling him, don't do anything, don't touch it. And he takes the figurine and he walks out to the back deck and he throws it onto their backyard. And Susan and the girls are crying because they're like, oh my gosh, you're gonna make this so much worse. Everybody's attention is towards the backyard. When they all turn around to look at the mantle, Matt thinking he had solved the problem, there is a figurine, an identical one of the cat that's sitting on the table again. They all gasp, they can't believe it, and it doesn't make any sense. They watch Matt throw the figurine. Matt doesn't care, picks it up and throws it on the ground and smashes it right then and there. And it's just this crazy sequence of events that when you hear the first-hand interviews with Susan, she can barely describe this moment because you're seeing something reappear. And then Matt is destroying it. It's like a very deliberate, aggressive act towards this thing in the house. The very opposite of what it was meant to do. And Susan would say that she knew they were going to go through hell for that. That night, after everybody finally fell asleep, Jamie wakes up in the middle of the night and goes down into the kitchen to get a snack.
Arena takes forever to load.
She sees written
I'm not grinding arena. That's why I only got 33,000.
Is the word cat.
I keep
everywhere.
Dying to that
spray. She immediately runs upstairs. She gets her mom. She gets Matt and Marie. Everybody sees that there's this word cat written everywhere. Matt looks at Jamie and says, "You're the one that found this. You did this." Susan comes to defend Jamie and says, "You're the one, Matt, that smashed the cat figurine. There's no wonder this is happening." And so this horrible fight happens where they aren't seeing what's actually going on. They're just seeing red and fighting with each other. Meanwhile, they're blatantly being haunted. In addition to cat being written everywhere, the house had been completely ransacked. I mean, everything's been dumped out of drawers. Everywhere that you could make a mess, there had been a mess.
My stream looks pretty good.
No one
I got better internet.
They were all
I'm
in
so
bed.
happy.
No one woke up to this much of a mess. It didn't make any sense. They start cleaning up this horrible mess. And as they move some things aside in the kitchen, they find what looks to be a huge footprint. It is not Matt's footprint. It's certainly not one of the girls' footprints. It's easy for us to say, well, why didn't you go to the police? But you got to remember that when you're in real crisis mode, your brain will tell you that everything is fine. It will be in complete denial of things that are right in front of you because it's a coping mechanism. And so they did nothing and just let it continue. Susan desperately wanted to leave the house, but she couldn't do it financially. They couldn't leave the house. They couldn't afford to, so they're trapped. At this point, the kids are getting very withdrawn. They don't want to be in the house, so Marie would end up staying in the room.
You can't say that. I'm streaming right now.
There was just nothing being done. Everybody was upset and angry with each other. In the last couple of weeks,
I'm gonna play arena.
The first one happened when Marie was home alone. She was only going to be there.
I'm about to say the word.
Shut up.
No, Susan and Matt did not want to leave her alone. They didn't have another choice, and Jamie wasn't there. So Marie's going to be home alone, and it's nighttime. So this is like straight out.
Oh yeah, nigga.
Lucas, I can hear you. I know you're screaming.
That's what I said.
And she knows because she's been in this house now and seen the craziness. That something bad.
If you could stop saying the N-word, that would be like
and
amazing.
the TV finally just turns on.
Dude, I'm gonna
She
cancel
turns
you,
on, she
Lucas.
reaches for the remote.
You just said the N-word. What do you
now
want?
She's just sitting there frozen because she knows that something's in the house with her. She watches as the rocking chair right in front of her just starts to rock back and forth. As if
I know, there's a delay, like a really big.
Yeah, I know. I make it like that so I can get my best ping possible.
And is now looking at her rocking back and forth. Marie is looking at the rocking chair as all the pictures on the walls just start one by one falling off the wall. Marie and Jamie had a habit of always having a digital camera with them at all times because they were taking pictures and filming everything strange happening in their house. And so as she's laying there,
Mark, can you like private yourself?
Horrified, she takes her camera in her hand and kind of turns it and just starts taking pictures of the room before running.
I'm supposed to
out the room
play.
to
Can you like not? Or Discord?
Susan,
Use Discord or something.
Everybody, she's screaming into the phone. You gotta get here. Something's going on. And Susan flies home. Jamie flies home. They rush inside and they grab her, and she's unhurt. But the house has once again been tossed. And then, after it all kind of settles down, Marie says, "I took pictures." And so Susan and Matt and Jamie look at these pictures. There are these weird orbs of light that are very clearly in the room with her, that are moving around the room. She managed to get a couple pictures of them, and they're just totally out of this world. At this point, Matt is convinced that there's something paranormal happening in the house. He's not even putting up the charade that this is Jamie, because it wasn't. It wasn't his daughter. It wasn't anybody. How can you explain these pictures? You can't.
I wish Stark
so
was still
Matt
here.
decides,
That was like the best season of Fortnite.
This, but I think you call the church. And so
For
he
me,
tried
like,
calling a bunch
just,
of priests
like,
and
everyone.
pastors and tried to get anybody to come over. And the best he could do was get a pastor to come over and pray with them before leaving and saying, we can't help you. And so they were totally on their own, and they can't afford to leave. They know something horrible's happening here, and they're just trapped. And finally, the second major event that occurred in those final 2 weeks happened to Jamie when she was home alone. Jamie was in her room and she starts hearing pounding on her door. She started filming this pounding on her door. There's no one home with her. And you just hear in her voice that she's terrified and someone is pounding over and over on the door, on her bedroom door. And at some point she knows she has to go into the hall. And so she goes over to the door. She's building the strength to reach down and open the door. And as soon as her hand would go near the doorknob, the pounding on the other side of the door would stop. Like it knew she was about to come out into the hall. And so she didn't open the door. And she went back onto her bed and she just sat there in the fetal position for 3 hours, listening to something smashing nonstop into the door. At some point the banging stopped. And after a few minutes of the banging being done,
I just only get like
this is her chance to
120 in the
escape
lobby.
house. She opens the door.
I'm so
and there's
happy I
no
get
one
more
there.
FPS.
But the door
I did
on
get
the
a better
outside
SSD
where the
though.
knocking had been happening, there's this
I don't
huge
know.
dent and divot in the door. And the door handle on the outside from the hallway side has been bent downward. On the ground in the hall is a pile of utensils, pots, pans, silverware, knives. This thing had been using tools to try to open the door. Next door to her room was a bathroom, and the bathroom door did not have a doorknob. You basically just pushed it shut. But there was a space for a doorknob that you could actually look through. They just hadn't put it on there. She noticed in the bathroom that the light was flickering, and she thought, I think it's in there. And she decides she's going to try to trap this thing. So she goes to her desk where she has some string. She goes back over and loops the string through this hole in the door, leans back and pulls the door, thinking she's trapped this thing inside.
Bruh.
As
You
soon
could
as
just
she
like
does,
try
she
to
starts
shoot
feeling
back or
resistance
something.
in her door. Someone's pulling her.
Just gave up.
And at some point, the string gets cut and she falls back into her room. At which point, the bathroom door swings open and she says, I'm about to come face to face with something unexpected. But before she can see this thing come out of the bathroom, her bedroom door slams shut. And she hears the rustling of pans and tools and metal clinking against each other right
Amazing.
outside the door. She knows this thing is interacting with all those tools and pots and pans right on the other side of the door. Horrifying thought. And after just a moment or two, she sees smoke coming into her bedroom. So she immediately runs to the door to try to open it. And when she does, she sees that now there is a frying pan sitting in the hall that has a toilet paper roll completely on fire. And that there's been toilet paper strewn all over the hallway. Like this is a wick and it's going to light the hallway on fire. She grabs a sweatshirt and she smothers the fire. At this point, she's in full survival mode. She knows she has to get out of this house. It's trying to kill her. And so she walks down this hall, pulling aside all of the toilet paper, getting ready to come face to face with this horrible thing. She goes into the living room. The whole thing has been covered in toilet paper, paper towels, papers have been strewn everywhere. This thing was trying to light the house on fire.
Sorry, I had to close out for a second. I couldn't pay, focus with that video on. Not saying it's bad or anything, I couldn't focus. I hate the new shotgun. It's complete dog shit. How do you miss that shot? Bruh! They're so good at the game. These defaults. Fuck! I hate this
Fire was
season, bro.
trapped inside.
That's why I don't
She
play
manages to make her
freaking
way through
this
maze of
version.
toilet paper. She
this
sees
game.
there's
I
no other
hate it.
fire set, and she goes outside defeated and just sits on the front steps of her house.
I think I'm just gonna skip all the competition for this
Susan,
season.
Matt, and
I
Emily were
hate
all
it.
together,
It's not like
so
I'm
they
gonna
came
make
back and
anything
they
already.
saw Jamie sitting on the
So I'm
front
just gonna-
steps just crying.
Fuck you.
They go inside, they see the scene, Jamie explains what happens, and that was it. They knew they were going to have to go bankrupt to leave the house. They did not have the money to leave, but they had to leave. And so they barely packed up and they left that house. It didn't sell. Susan literally went bankrupt. Soon after they left the neighborhood, their neighbors left the neighborhood, and 5 other neighbors in their immediate vicinity all left. All of the houses did not sell. They are all vacant. No one knows why. Susan, Jamie, Matt, and Marie, since leaving the neighborhood, even though they were ruined financially, they were very happy to get out of there. They've had no other paranormal activity since they left, and they're just glad they got out of there with their lives. So I'd love to get your reaction to the story.
Bro, dude, lagging.
Do you think you like it? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, there are more stories like it. Then again, if already, sneak into the bathroom the next time the like button is taking a shower and steal their towel and their clothes. Also, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications. If you have a story that you think would be a good fit for this channel, whether it's your personal story or just a story suggestion, please go to our subreddit. It's just called Mr. Ballin. It's linked below in the description, and submit it there. I read that subreddit every single day, so I would definitely see it if you put it on. If you want to get in touch with me, you can join me on Instagram. My name is John Ballin6. I also just find you because they're for a company habit of always having a digital camera with them at all times. What's going on, guys? Mr. Ballin here. Earlier I had been saying you probably know me from TikTok, but the reality is the majority of people that are watching this video or who are watching my other videos are actually just from YouTube. It's really cool to feel like YouTube is promoting some of my videos. I think I'm incredibly lucky to have that happen. I'm incredibly lucky to have this thing growing, and I'm incredibly lucky to have.
Did someone die? Holy shit, I want to play.
So thank you for tuning in. A little bit about me. I am a former Navy SEAL. I got retired at the end of 2017. I initially started making content pretty much exclusively about SEAL and my experiences. But then when I got on TikTok, I kind of pivoted and started scary stories.
How?
Mysteries, that type of content, purely because I enjoy it. I was very fortunate that it took off on TikTok, and here I am on YouTube, kind of trying to do the same thing, sharing content about, darker but really interesting, compelling stories. And it's something I'm passionate about, and I'm really happy that I started to grow a platform that is still based on that. I love stories in depth. So today I'm going to be covering a very famous haunting. But before I get into any details,
Don't tell me when to die. Oh my god.
this video and my channel in general are not designed to be an attempt at convincing people that the paranormal is real or ghosts.
I just got a new mouse. I ain't doing it. I just switched it because I don't hate the library. It's just like it doesn't have enough support for that. Wrist. My wrist would always start hurting. Mom's yelling. Not necessarily but rather that the events that led to people speculating. Oh my gosh, I hate this spring meta.
The actors in the story
Bro, why are these?
basically corroborate.
Oh my god, you're so good at the game.
Getting to the end of the
And I'm
story
still fighting. I hate those people that just run. I'm still fighting. This reloading is so garbage.
Too long didn't read version of this. You have a single mom
How come?
and she starts hearing noises.
You're a better player, man.
Attic, she can't make sense of it. She has friends, babysitters that are at the house that also hear it. Her ex-husband happening in the house. Then, through a weird series of events that
I do box fight, and it's always
landlords and child protective services have a paranormal with camera equipment and all that. They come in the house and they end up documenting quite a bit of startling imagery and footage that only lends credibility to the fact that this actually might be a real haunting. So that's the story in a nutshell. Let's dive in. In 1989, a 23-year-old woman named Jackie Hernandez has just broken up with her husband, Al. It was an amicable separation. They just weren't on good terms. They decided it's time to get a divorce, but we will, happily co-parent our 2 kids together. So it's an amicable breakup. Jackie moves
spent like
into
$200
a
on this
small,
shit.
modest home in San
Nice
Pedro,
mouse.
California, with the kids.
I bought 2 of them.
And she's working a ton. She's a student at night. She's working multiple jobs. It's a very hard, stressful time. But she's doing her best to support her family and kind of land on her feet. So about a month after living in this house, Jackie comes home from a long day at school and work, and she sits down, the kids are asleep, and she puts on the TV. And she's just trying to decompress. And as she's sitting there, she starts to hear what sounds like little pebbles falling down inside of the walls. So she mutes the TV and she's listening, and it's just periodically little pebbles are falling down the wall.
I don't
She
really
goes
care what
up
team
and
I'm
she's
on.
listening, with
Oh.
her ear against the wall, and
What
she's
is
thinking to
this
herself,
random?
there's got to be, a mouse or some critter
What
up in my
the fuck
attic,
is happening?
unfortunately, that's kicking some pebbles into a gap in the wall. And when she's listening, she thinks she hears what sounds like footsteps in the attic. So it startles her. Now she's really paying close attention to the attic. She doesn't hear it again. This is the first time
How did you give me that? Bro, build a wall. Holy shit.
she just heard and assumed she was just hearing things in the attic. I'll deal with it later. So a couple days later, Jackie has her friend Susan over to just hang out with her at her house. The kids are asleep and they're relaxing,
I'm on the
talking,
Viper
sitting
right
on the couch. And as they're sitting there, they hear a loud bang in the kitchen. It sounded like something had fallen. So this Jackie had mentioned to Susan this weird, like, yeah, I think I got an animal up in the
Oh my gosh.
the funny thing was, is I
Random
sworn I heard
drops in
footsteps
FPS,
but,
that's so
probably
annoying.
didn't find that fix on it. So Susan is keyed in. Maybe there's a little bit of weirdness happening in the house. So when they hear this
Of course
sound
they
in the
left.
kitchen, it's like they both instantly go to,
I hate this
okay,
game.
what's happening here? Is this more to do
Or
with the
bots.
footsteps in the attic, or is there a rational explanation?
What is this? It
They're
drops
on
the 4
guard, they
FPS
walk
for
into
no
the
reason.
kitchen, and they find a picture that was hanging on the wall that had fallen, which honestly is not,
Feels
that's
really
not a
small.
cause for a ghost is in the house. But it was held up and we're standing
was
on
easy.
their head, point up, next to the entrance.
My aim is better on the Viper.
So
But like,
imagine if a picture falls.
the
are all
Logitech's
nails gonna
just
come out and land
overall
on the
better.
head right
I don't
next
know.
to it? No, it's almost
like
impossible.
more. I don't know.
Sure enough, that
I
happened.
put my
So
webcam, but it's
Susan
broken.
and
I
Jackie
hate
are
this
staring
shit.
at the picture, they're staring at the nails, and they have no idea what to make of it.
Oh my gosh, stop cutting out, please.
Susan was a little bit more eager to connect it to these footsteps in the attic, but she also did not want to
Oh my gosh,
frighten
you
her
just
friend.
clicked on the wrong monitor.
So they kind of talked a little bit about it, and maybe how what's happening in the house. They both kind of decided,
Put a pickaxe
without
in.
saying anything, that we're going to kind of avoid this topic. So they put the picture away, the nails away.
I don't know, I feel like I
Susan
just gotta
she's
switch it,
a little
you know?
freaked out, and so she's gone. The next night, Susan actually brings over a new babysitter. It's this 16-year-old girl. And so I guess, Jackie
Random
wanted a
cutout?
little bit of time
Okay.
to leave the house. She thought that she was kind of losing her mind with all the stress and work and school. And so Tina comes over. Jackie had not told Tina anything about what was going on. She was just like, hey, take care of the kids, see you in a little bit. She's sitting on the couch, Tina, the babysitter.
Oh, wow.
You know what, I'm gonna just check on the kids. I got a weird feeling.
is he gonna
Make
pull
sure
it off?
if they're okay in their bedroom.
I think I might pull it off.
And as soon as she goes to push the door, the
Pull it
door
off, pull it off.
opens.
No!
She
You could have pulled it off!
saying it was strange.
You little
before I actually made contact with the door. The door swung open. But, I didn't think anything of it. I walked in, the sun is just fine. So I walked back out and I shut the door. But as soon as I shut it, I turned around and it was open again. And she described thinking that, oh, I guess, the house must
Yeah, this guy lowered my freaking
And
FPS.
I
My
think
ping
that
goes up.
Tina on some level was hoping that Jackie
Oh,
would hear what she was saying and have some
Gangnam Style. Sexy
like, oh,
lady.
my door. The door always does that, something like that. But Tina was shocked when she told her this, and Jackie reacted visibly like she was concerned. And Tina's like keying in on it, and she was like, I mean, do you know why this could happen? Why the door was kind of opening? Jackie just said, you know, honestly, that happened. And so they talked about it a little bit, but ultimately, you know, they both decided, you know what, I think that the connecting things don't need to be connected. It's just a couple of strange occurrences. So Tina leaves, Jackie goes to bed, and they don't think about it. So the next day, Jackie has Tina come back over because she needs some more help with the kids.
Oh my
And so as
gosh,
they're
stop
standing in
doing
the
that.
kitchen, Jackie's
That's so
describing
annoying.
to Tina what she needs to do, when to feed the kids, what time to put them to bed. Tina just kind of stops paying attention to Jackie, looks up at the corner.
Hold on, it's one at a time.
She says, did you put in a piece of light? Jackie looks too, and she's like, whoa. And it looks like
Oh, not good.
light bulb, the weird looking light bulb in the corner of the kitchen on the ceiling, which there wasn't a light bulb over there, and Jackie says as much, and they're looking at it, and it begins to move. Not towards them, just it was like
Stop doing that.
kind of moving around.
He's dropping a 4
An
FPS for no
orb
reason.
of light kind of moving around. And now, as Jackie almost everybody, virtually they took a picture of it. It didn't go away. They went and got a camera, and they took a of light between the pebbles in the wall, the footsteps in the wall,
Oh shit, bro. Why would you think that if you're lower? Just
with
eliminate
saying
it.
the door wouldn't shut.
Oh, these people got no brains.
Jackie has officially kind of gone from I'm going to play this rational and not worry about it to I have no idea what's wrong and I can't explain this. I can't tell people this without them thinking I'm crazy, with the exception of Susan and Tina, because her kids were too young to know what was going on. There's no one that can talk about anxieties and fear about what was happening. How do you, a skeptical, rational person, go to those, for example, the police and say, hey, there's nothing in my attic, but I believe there's someone walking around my attic and kicking pebbles into my walls and knocking pictures off the wall and taking the nails out and standing on the head. You know, like they're gonna say that, well, are you doing this? Are your kids doing this? And so the only person that Jackie finally felt comfortable telling was her ex-husband. They were still amicable. She had Al come over and he says to him, you know, I have a lot of weird things happening. She showed him the picture, the lights in the kitchen, describes everything that happened in the house. And Al would say that, in a way, he thought it was kind of an act to maybe draw attention to
Hey, my friends. When they just say, bro, bro.
he wasn't sure.
Just
if
get
that's what it
straight to
was.
the
He
fucking
definitely
point.
was not ready to believe. Listens, and he says, look, kind of almost playing along with her. He's like, let's just call it out. Something happened in your house, we should call it out. And so he stands up and she's saying, no, don't do that. Show yourself. Around, nothing. And I think in a way, Jack footsteps, but there was nothing.
Oh my gosh, she's about to lose.
See, there's nothing to worry about here. You know, just stop worrying.
This dude's
about it.
obviously
He
in
leaves,
control.
and Jackie's disappointed but not shocked. And she goes to put something away in the closet. This is immediately after he's left. And she opens this closet, and inside the closet, on every wall, inside the closet, on the back of the door, was written Al. A in red, L in blue. A-L. All over the wall. And that had not been there what she believes was a response to the challenge by Al. So at this point, if she had money, she said she would have left. But she didn't. She didn't have the resources to move.
The
So
reason.
she's just kind of trapped, and she's expressing her concerns and her anxiety to her friend Susan. And the two of them are actually out for a walk in their neighborhood, and she's telling Susan how scared she is and like, what do I even do? And it just so happens that the landlord, her landlord, Jackie's landlord, was walking down the street at the same time, and they bump into each other. They have some pleasantries, and Susan, just kind of without even asking Jackie's permission, says to the landlord, hey, there's some weird stuff happening in our house. she doesn't want to tell anyone because she thinks people will think she's crazy. And so they go into describing to the landlord all the strange happenings in the house, the lights that they got a picture of, the pebbles, all the footsteps, all of it. And the landlord is very religious and is very concerned and says, would you allow me to have 2 priests come to your house and check your house out?
Popping. Oh, you know this dude does
Jackie,
sweat, but his
is-
ass. You know his
she
ass.
is a religious person,
I'm about to just
but to be
clap his
honest,
juicy
was a little
cheeks.
skeptical at the idea of introducing religion to what was going on. I think that for her, she just wanted it to go away, but then again, she had nowhere to turn, and so she was like, okay, yeah, we'll have the priest come over and check it out. So the next day, these 2 priests show up to her house, and Jackie's house was very much in disarray. She had 2 young kids, she was working multiple jobs, doing school late, and she had all this weirdness happening in her house. And so the kids are crying, it's just
Oh my gosh, you just got dogged on.
what happened from this visit is the priest walked around.
Dumb
offering
down.
to bless the
What?
children, but really they didn't have any sort of like conclusion, and then they leave. And Jackie was like, well, you know, that didn't really do anything for me, but okay. The next day, she gets a visit from Child Protective Services because the priest had actually filed a complaint saying that this was all a hallucination by an incompetent notion that the house was haunted.
You gotta give this to me. No, it didn't edit.
Child Protective Services, it's called, who basically threatened Jackie to like clean it up, literally clean up your house, but like we're gonna be checking in on you to make sure you're a fit mother. And so this is a huge blow, because now Jackie is seeing what happens when you bring up that your house is haunted, right? That this is what can happen. And so now she is not prepared to share this with anybody. So over the next couple weeks, Jackie brings her kids into the living room and they all start sleeping in the same room. She's increasingly paranoid. You know, she's overworked and she's not sleeping enough, and she's just kind of really spiraling. And, you know, Susan, who's her friend, is really taking a notice, is noticing this. And she also knows the sensitivity of being able to really share this with, you know, authority, because she knows what the Child Protective Services call, and she knows that Jackie is really afraid to share the story with anyone. But she goes over and tells her, you have to call a paranormal investigator. It is
If they put the palm, I'll be pissed because it's a one-on-one vote, which automatically goes here.
They're not going to treat you like they're crazy. And if nothing else, that is a reason to call them. Even if what
If it's
they
a palm, I'm
provide
gonna
is
leave.
worthless to you,
Okay.
that, you know, it doesn't accomplish anything, there are at
Thanks,
least
man.
a group of people that are going to take
I
you
hate the
seriously.
palm, bro.
And so
I also hate
finally,
the striker,
Jackie
but
says,
that's actually in the game and actually makes me better.
so a couple days go by, and this team shows up at their house, a paranormal investigator team.
Cuts off
Orders
like
me,
that.
they are in it to try to capture. And even though they were ready to listen to Jackie and had obviously
Oh, my
taken her seriously
button
enough
for
that they
editing.
showed up at her house, they were fairly skeptical. By their own admission, this whole case had happened.
That's why you don't choose a
They
palm.
had covered it prior to this. And
Bro, there's
thought
something on my
there was
edit
equipment
button.
and all that
There's like some
had never worked
grit or
with
something.
people that would even hint
Grime.
at the existence of ghosts or the paranormal. And so you could say that they were sympathetic to people that had these experiences, but usually either there was nothing going on or they found a rational explanation for whatever the person was claiming to happen. They didn't have any paranormal footage. They're interviewing the 3 investigators. They're asking her some questions.
Whoa! That was my wall.
There with the kids, so he's in the other room with the kids, and they're interviewing her, and then the power goes out, which it sounds pretty cliche, and I get that, but the power goes off, and then the power comes back on, and it visibly shakes Jackie. She had been living in this house with all these weird occurrences, and it was like she had this feeling that something bad was going to happen. So she starts acting physically scared. Something going on.
Oh my
So I kinda
gosh.
stopped the interview. And let's just go have a
How
look
am I
at the
getting these walls, bro?
look,
Man's on like
there, we'll
200
come
ping
back
this.
down, we'll chat with her. And so one of the 3 investigators gets a ladder and crawls through this little crawl space into the attic. And so So he goes up.
Oh
And so
my
while
God.
he's doing that, Al, who's in the other room with the kid, he's wide awake, laying with his son. He's just like waiting. He's not really expecting anything to happen. And as he's laying there, he could have sworn he heard someone whisper in his ear, "Tell them to get the hell out." And he has an interview he does where he describes this moment, and you can tell that Al is as skeptical as they come, and he's like, "I just don't know how."
Dog shit, bro. Complete
Right after I
dog
heard
shit,
it,
bro.
I heard
Audio
a
is
scream.
garbage.
The guy, the photographer who'd gone up into the attic, he was alone up there, and he had brought his expensive camera, and he comes running downstairs or jumps through the hole and practically falls out of the attic. And he tells them, "Something grabbed my camera. There's no one up there, but something grabbed my camera." And his heart's racing, his face is pale, and the other investigators,
Way better.
they're starting to feel like what's going on. Al comes bursting out of the room and the photographer's like, "My camera." And he goes from being scared of what happened to now being I need to
How did I miss that shot? How am I
back up
missing
into
my
the
shot?
attic with
Bro.
his camera, and
I
he
think he's on
finds
something.
the body on one side of the
Okay.
attic.
Yeah, he's definitely
And
on
then
something.
The lens of the camera had been removed and placed on the other side. He comes down with his camera, and you can tell that what he's just discovered is really shaken him up, and the other investigators are also very shaken up.
How's
And
the score better
the
than
plan
mine, bro?
to do
These
that
kids
night,
are
whether it was
complete
finishing
dog
the interview
shit.
with Jackie or whatever, has now gone out the window. They're ready to leave. Jackie is pleading with them to stay. Al's freaked out. No one knows what's
Look at that.
happening. And the
Look at that
investigators
dog.
are, "Yep, we're
Look at it
good.
climb
We'll
up.
be back soon. We'll be back soon. I promise." It's really good. After they leave, Al sticks around for a little bit longer, but ultimately has to go back. Jackie's left all alone with the kids.
When
She
am
is
I ever gonna
totally
find
freaked
anyone
out. She
good so
feels
I
like
could
the
get
investigators
better?
have set
I'm hitting a
the
plateau
house.
because I can't find
So
anyone
she's
better than
pretty
me
much on edge
to
for
fight
something
a
bad
bit
to
better
happen,
at.
and sure enough, it does. So that night, Jackie is laying on the sofa. She's in full crisis mode. She has no idea what's going on in her house. Watching the investigators who are supposed to be investigating this stuff be obviously spooked and leave really unsettled her. She felt like she didn't have any support from Al. She just felt like the whole situation had just completely fallen apart.
I gotta
And she's
practice
so
these
scared
corner
for her
edits.
kid.
I used to be really good
Laying
until I
on the
stopped
sofa,
playing.
and at some point she must have passed out. And suddenly, she looks at the phone, and she believes what appears to be
You didn't
the
place the
figure of an
wall, but it's
old man
okay. I'm
standing
too
there
good.
with
So
her.
I recovered.
Screams, vanishes, she grabs her kids, and she runs out of the house. The first people she calls is the investigators, because again, she's worried about telling the police in fear that they would think it was her being crazy and have her kids taken from her. So she calls the investigators, and they don't pick up. But she
Probably
leaves a
better than
voicemail
this kid
on the
when I'm on
voicemail.
control.
She's completely desperate. Please come back. I am out of the house. I can't go back.
Oh.
Like, I can't go back.
Oh.
Please help me. And one of the photographers who was there heard the voicemail and decides, you know what? We got to go back. It's super late at night. They find Jackie outside of her property in pajamas with her kids. She's totally freaked out. They bring her inside, and the house is totally calm. There's no sign of anything going on. And so they're kind of walking around the house. No one goes in the attic. They're just walking around, and it's silent. And after a little bit of time, maybe because
Place
it's
the
so
wall.
calm,
I can aim. Please. I can shoot sometimes too. Look at that.
Sanity, let's just
Dude's so bad. I
two
feel
of the
bad.
investigators go up into the attic. One has a camera, and then the other just has.
He's probably the type of dude in an arena
So
to
they
just
go up
spray
there,
instead of
and
actually fight and like
Jackie
run away like
is
really badly when you like
unconsciously
injure him.
standing at the foot of the attic.
It's really sad, but it's alright.
The guys who are up in the attic walking around, they're reporting down to them. We don't see anything, we don't hear anything. It's quiet up here, but like the tension is building, right? And they stop at some point, the two in the attic, and it's just like silence. And all of them reported hearing a snap. And then
They didn't shoot.
a third snap. And then silence. And Jackie
Does that dude
has
not know to
overwhelmed.
jump behind the person if you're getting shot
Guys
at?
in the attic are trying to stay calm. They're like kind of trying to talk.
My
to them.
ass
Oh, that
is
could have
in
been the roof.
pain.
Oh, it could have been this. But the investigator who's down below with Jackie and Jackie herself, they start kind of panicking. They're like, hey, come on, come back down. Let's not risk it. Something's about to happen. Come back down. So as they're making their way back over to the exit of the attic, and it's totally pitch black up there, minus whatever light source they had, all of a sudden, one of the investigators just gets yanked backwards into the attic. And it was actually the guy holding the flashlight. And so they hear like a tumbling of the flashlight, a tumbling of the camera, and silence from this other investigator. The other investigator who's up in the attic with him that was not yanked back, he turns around and the guy's gone. And that guy, who has not been yanked suddenly, all he has is this camera. The other guy has a flashlight. So he instinctively starts clicking pictures with his camera to use the flash. Jackie and the guy on the ground, they're screaming, what's going on, and he's just clicking pictures, not looking in the viewfinder, just flashing. And he sees that
Oh
one of
my
the
gosh.
investigator has
Who owns this map? It's gotta fix it.
He's been tied to a post. And so they run over, the investigator who's up there with him, he runs over, he unties him, pulls him down, and that guy's, totally freaked out. He doesn't know how he got up there. They collect their stuff and they practically fall out
Oh
of
my
the attic.
gosh.
Just
I
pure
said it
mayhem.
twice.
He's
Man,
freaked
oh,
out,
it's the
he's
same
half
dude.
faced, he's got these
He just
marks
gave
on his
up.
neck, something going on his neck, and they run out of the house, never to go back in. Jackie says that she's not experienced anything paranormal since this instance, and swears that this was not a hoax. That in fact this is one of the lowest points of her life, and it made her look like an incompetent mother, and it makes her look crazy, and a lot of people still think she's crazy. This was just a traumatic event, no explanation. So
We're just
I'd love
not
to hear
gonna
what you guys
edit?
think. If
Oh
there's
my
a better
gosh, I
explanation
hate this
than
game.
those, let me know in the comments. And please be
Oh yeah,
sure
sometimes
to
I
like
click
and
too fast, the
subscribe if
edit
you've not
goes
already.
through, but it doesn't
Also,
like
you can check me out
actually
on
move the
Instagram.
title.
My handle's JohnBallin416, and then on
Let's see if I can do
TikTok,
here.
it's Mr. Ballin as well. I hope
Like
you
that,
guys
look.
enjoyed this. Talk to you next week.
What is that? Yeah, sure. I used to be a lot faster, but I purposely slowed myself down so then I wouldn't miss so many edits. I used to miss a lot of edits because of how fast I was. Look at my old streams, I'd always miss it, and I had to change my bind so like I'm missing. And I changed it again because I was getting out fast again. You're thinking, what binds? It's still H. It's like the select bind. Change it 3 times already. Oh my gosh, He crouched! The crouch saved him. It doesn't matter. Don't matter, man. Let's choose another ghost story. Which one? Marines fighting ghosts. Let's do
The
that one.
paranormal does not really have a place in the military, despite what anybody tells you. It's just not something that gets discussed. Now, I was a bit of an anomaly. I was in the Navy for 7 years. 5 of those years were spent on
it
the SEAL
feels
team,
like
and
shit.
maybe because we were in such small teams, people had to put up with my weirdness and my interest in, the strange happenings around the world. But, really that was an anomaly. And I think it comes from the culture inside the military where you have a group of people that has such a intense job that's so rooted on practical approaches to problem solving. There is no time to be theorizing about how demons and ghosts and things that are out of this world are having an impact, because we need to focus on what's happening right now in front of us. There's no space for anything else. And so when you do hear stories coming out of the military that are paranormal in nature, it isn't that you should inherently believe them, but rather you should understand that if they have come to the conclusion that this is paranormal, they have ruled out virtually everything else. And so today I'm going to
Dude,
share
so
a
bad.
military paranormal story that happened in Afghanistan in 2009 when
You
8
left.
U.S. Marines were stationed at this very isolated observation post
I
in the
don't
middle of
blame him.
Helmand Province.
If I was as
And
bad
some
as him,
very strange things
about
happened
someone
out
as good as
there
me, I'd
that
leave
the
too.
Marines that were there believe are still plaguing them to this day. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious
to
delivered in
gaslight
story
myself.
format, You've come to the
Or
right
anything.
channel because that's all I do, and I upload 3, 4, even 5 times every week. So if that's of
I'm gonna have
interest
to
to
do
you,
my
I would
AOWs.
encourage you to play Ding Dong Ditch on the like button's house, and then also subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's story.
Last game before I start my
In
homework.
June of 2009,
Oh, I
U.S.
hate
and
homework.
NATO forces surged into Afghanistan. Troop numbers escalated dramatically in preparation for this massive
Microphone just,
offensive
like,
against the
electrocuted
Taliban.
me.
During this surge, a very small
I used to
team
be
of Marines,
18,000,
8
now it's
Marines,
23,000.
were given a mission
Yeah.
to go to an observation post in Helmand province where a group of British soldiers
Oh
were
my
stationed
gosh,
at the
when
time.
is it
An
gonna be?
observation post, or OP as it's called in the military, is any location where you're able to observe. Hence the name. Most OPs, if not all OPs, are located on high ground because that provides the best view. OPs are very strategically valuable. You have the higher
What is he
ground and you
doing?
can see what's going on around you. And so as a result, OPs become prime targets for attack. Now, the OP that these Marines were going to, OP Rock, was a little bit unique. It was strategically very important, but it didn't really have the higher ground. All around it were other large pieces of terrain, which meant if you poke your head up for too long, you might get shot from a sniper on the mountain. And so OP Rock was like a very dangerous and isolated place to be. Not to mention laughably small and had almost no amenities. It was basically a couple of HESCO barriers with big brown squares that get filled with sand and dirt to stop bullets, and then
Does he
not
really
even
think I'm
cops,
gonna
they slept
kill him or
literally on the
something? Or he's, like,
ground
purposely
on
trying to run
sleeping
away?
pads and a couple of ghillie tents overhead. That was about it. And so these Marines were going to be there for 60 days, where they were not going to be able to go anywhere. They were just isolated and stuck on this tiny little wasteland in the middle of Afghanistan. The 8 Marines were led by Sergeant Green, and his second in command was Corporal Lena. The other 6 junior Marines were Zolik, Hoyt,
Ozer's
Wilson,
still finding
Parker,
things to
Smith,
place.
and Gibbs. After driving their up-armored vehicles all the way through the snaking pass that get
Oh
to
my
Oak
gosh.
Rock, and the British soldiers are there anxiously waiting for them. Normally, anytime you turn over with any other unit, we do something called turnover operations, where because you're new to the area, you want to go out and do like a presence patrol or something to get a feel for the area with the people who have been there, to kind of give you a lay of the land and say, hey, look out for this area, we think there's IEDs over there. Remember, if you're over here, you're in plain sight of the enemy, they can shoot you. But when they got there, the British were so anxious to leave, they did not do turnover off. The British just looked totally weathered and beaten down and ragged, like they'd been fighting at OP Rock for decades. They'd only been there for 60 days, the same amount of time that these Marines are about to be there. And before they leave, one of the British soldiers turns and says, hey, just so you know, if you dig anything up here, just put it back. And the Marines look at him like, what are you talking about? And he doesn't elaborate. He just says again, if you dig anything up, just put it back. Trust me. So that night, the men have settled into their new home for the next 60 days. And the way it works on any base in the world, but certainly in a war zone, is there's always someone manning a guard post. And so the first night, it happened to be Corporal Lena's turn to be
My
on
last one.
watch. Corporal Lena is the second in command of these 8 Marines. And he was up in the guard tower. And you gotta put
Homework.
yourself in his mind, okay? Even if you've never been to Afghanistan, just imagine being out in the middle of nowhere. Like in the middle of a mountainous desert with no village, no people, no anything. But at the same time, you are hanging it out there. You are totally exposed. There are people in the mountains around you that want to kill you, for sure. And it's you and 7 other sleeping people right in your little tiny OP. All you got is a radio.
This
where you
better
can
be a
call back
striker or
to
I'm gonna
your
kill yourself.
main base that's far enough away that if something bad happens,
Striker,
you better hope
striker.
that 1, you can get through to them, and 2, they can get over here as quickly as they can. And the great fear when you're in these remote
Please.
locations is that you're going to get ambushed. There's so many stories about these
Why
complex
these-
attacks being launched on these small little outposts where all of a sudden groups like these Marines just get totally overrun. So it's a terrifying thing. I was at Afghanistan all at my
Oh,
You're
what?
up
I
in
hit
the
him
shack and
3
you're kind of
times with a
looking
pump.
out into this, like, vast
Doesn't matter, this
expanse
game
of
sucks ass.
nothingness. And you're wondering, like, are people watching me right now? You know, is someone taking aim at me right now? I mean, you're protected and you're doing all the things you're supposed to do, but nighttime in Afghanistan, standing guard duty, it's very eerie. And so this first night, Lena is up there. It's very quiet, and his radio is right next to him. Like, imagine like a big walkie-talkie, like military-grade radio. It starts crackling. Military radios, at least American military radios, are from the 1950s. Basically not changed. Very durable, but it's not uncommon for them to falter, and that's why we have people that specialize in just radios that can fix these things for you. Because if you lose your line of communication, you're screwed. And so he's sitting there and he starts hearing crackling on the radio. And so he notices it, but he doesn't think much of it. And the crackling stops. He's looking out into the mountainside and he's kind of looking around, just doing his typical guard duty. Then the crackling picks up again and he thinks he can hear someone speaking in the radio. It didn't sound like even words necessarily, but it was a little bit louder. Now he's really paying attention to it. Because he was worried he first took the battery off, looked at it, blew it off, reconnected the battery, rebooted it, and put it back down, and he's a little more keyed into his radio. And then a couple minutes later, he hears this crackling, and now he can clearly hear someone's voice. And it sounds like Russian. He thinks someone is speaking in Russian. This is an encrypted radio. You're not picking up random signals all over the place. You only are picking up people that have your crypto. And it doesn't make any sense to pick up this has to be someone on your team. And so he thinks, okay, I'll check in with the main base because my guys are all asleep. They're all sleeping right there, 7 of them. Full bed. They're laying on the ground right there. I can count them.
You really think we're gonna pick that? I ain't gonna miss those shots.
Into the main base and says, hey, is anybody pushing traffic out this way to OP Rock? And like right away, they get a response from the main base that says, no, we're not pushing or receiving traffic. Lena's not terrified about this, but he's like, okay, there's something going on with the radio. The crackling and gurgling and weird sounds would persist throughout the night to the point where the next morning when the next guard came on duty, he said, hey, there's something strange going on with the radio.
Yeah, man, I'm fully gonna miss that floor, please.
Somebody else's radio.
Whoa, what? It just
Lena's
aimed
relieved
down.
of guard
That's
duty,
why I
and
always
he goes
switch.
down
Oh my
to check
god.
on the other Marines.
Am I gonna have to
point,
switch it back?
everybody's awake, and you know, it's the start of their first
I
full
hope
day
not.
at OP Rock. And because they have nothing else to do besides defend it, they start taking stock of how well fortified is it, what are some ways that we can improve this place, and they notice that there's a trench dug around the inside of OP Rock, basically right up against the house, that allows anyone to stand and not be jutting out of the OP and run the risk of
Just lag spike or my
and they're looking at
FPS
it and
just
they're
dropped.
thinking to themselves, maybe a couple
Oh
feet
my
down,
god,
you're
I'm
certainly
so done
not going
with
to be
this
able to
game.
stand on this trench. You'll totally be exposed. And they thought, why didn't the British, who were here for 60 days, why didn't they dig a deeper trench? And so Lena and the rest of the Marines decide they're going to spend that day digging the trench a little bit deeper and a little bit wider. As they're digging, Lena hits something metal in the trench. And he pulls it out, and it's like this metal stake, like an engineering stake. And he brushes off the dirt on the stake, and you can see some foreign writing, and it looks like Russian writing. And he's thinking to himself, oh, that's not that weird. Back in the 80s, the Russians were here. It's totally possible that they may have left some of their gear here, and it got buried. About 10 meters away, Lena is one of the younger Marines named Wilson, who's digging, and at some point he hits the ground and like a pocket in the soil, and he sees there's some pottery and some like ceramics that are inside of this hole. And after pulling out some of the plates and pots, they pull out a huge human bone, a femur. You're right. They ultimately decide to tuck the leg bone back into their walls, and they stop digging
Bro,
in that
you have
area.
to use your
and they continue
brain
to
while
dig
playing this game.
other
I'm sorry.
sections
You
of the
can't
trench.
just be brain dead.
They couldn't dig more than a couple inches before running into more human remains. And by the end of the day, they had unearthed dozens of skeletons inside of this trench. And so they realized that this is probably what the British meant when they said, if you dig something up, put it back. A couple of weeks go by, and the Marines at this point have accepted that they live in a very creepy place. And on day 13 of being at OP Rock, Hoyt, who has just turned 20 years old, is up on guard duty. As he's sitting there, he starts getting a really uncomfortable feeling that someone is right behind him. And so at one point, he turns around to look at what's behind him, basically looking
I
back
hate people like
into
you.
the camp itself.
You didn't peek.
And
You're just
coming from
annoying.
outside the wire where he had just been looking, he hears this horrible blood-curdling
Oh my gosh.
scream.
Just die.
He's looking out. He's got his night vision goggles on. He's looking around for anything. And
Watch
all of a sudden,
try.
a couple
He's probably
hundred meters
sweating
away,
his ass
he
off,
sees
to be
a man
honest.
running between one bush to another bush. Now they know that at any time they could get attacked. So they're not thinking that this could be anything other than the Taliban coming to attack them. And so the other Marines have jumped up because they heard the scream and they're looking to Hoyt to be like, what's going on? Hoyt is saying to them, I got a guy, he's about 200 meters away. I just saw him running right to left. Lena runs over to the edge of the HESCO and he raises his rifle with a thermal image on it. He's looking out and there's no heat signature out there. It's totally cold. No animals,
Oh my God.
nothing. And Lena is yelling to Hoyt, where is he? Where do I need to look? And Hoyt's saying, he's right there. I just saw him go behind that bush. But Lena is looking out and he can't see anything on thermal. And he's like, I don't see anything. There's no